Hello. I was thinking of answering your questions or exploring with you in like one massive narrative video, and I thought, oh, that's just going to be awful. So I'm going to chunk it up into different videos. This first one is about slave narratives that discuss plants, ecology, and escapes. So there's two big chunks in there. There's escapes, and I know there's a ton of literature, Harriet Tubman sort of a stuff, where there's going to be a lot of interviews and things like that. But plants in ecology, I thought, ooh, how do we find that? I was just working with a class about primary sources. And one of the big primary sources that we have and that have been digitized like crazy because they're super easy to digitize and they don't take up a lot of space on the server because usually it's just text are oral histories. So it's an interview with somebody who was something. They were there at a certain time. It's firsthand accounts. So think of it as like a glorified interview of somebody from the past. So instead of snippets, you get like a book. And there's oral histories being created right now. So there's like COVID oral histories, there's transgender oral histories, there's if you go way back into history, there's Civil War histories. And I thought, well, what happens if we look for those sort of things? So let me show you one trick that I've got. Let me show you one. I've got many tricks up my sleeve. If you go to Google, there's something called a contextual search. And I call it a contextual search. I have no idea what they call it. But if you take any word or words and then put a colon after it, what that means is the words that you type in after that, it's going to search in the context of what's before the colon. So I only want oral histories, and then I use the keyword slavery. It's going to give me all of those ones that are in community projects, library projects, this Library of Congress, Voices Remembering, Slavery, and that sort of a thing. And since there's so many of them out there, fingers crossed there's so many of them out there, you could add other keywords like plants, botany, I don't know if ecology, oh, I don't want to ask too much. It, it, it might look for all of those. Let's look for botany first. Oral history, slavery, botany. You could use narratives as well. Scholars use the word narratives to describe things like this. So what I see a lot is slaves' food plots and what they grew. To get away from that, I'm not sure. You might have to read between the lines. But you had some other words like ecology. And that's like a $60 word, so this is going to be less of the folky community stuff and more of like scholarly articles. And you can see JSTOR shows up in here. Ex-slave interviews. And here's an interesting thing. It'll even talk about bias. So the Works Progress Administration in the Depression did oral histories, but that's like pre-World War II. Civil rights was something that was coming in the future, and so did people throw in bias? Were they afraid to say things? Were some of these things suppressed? Probably. But you, the historian, you get to determine things like that. Oral history on slavery, escapes, there's going to be a ton of stuff, so you could use that same keyword. But when you see this in JSTOR, or you could go into that database too. I just thought of something. You could do interviews, and then it's looking, and oral histories are an interview really. But you could try that as a contextual search. So having said all of that, open web, there's going to be a ton of great stuff. And a lot of it wants to be indexed because these communities want their taxpayer. So like the University of Utah, we want the taxpayers to be able to access all of these oral histories that we've digitized at University of Utah libraries. And so a lot of them are exposed to Google search engines and things like that. So this is a fairly reliable way to go. Moving on to the library, I did a search from the main page that looks like this, and you have to be more formal in the library catalog. So I did have chickens in the backyard. Sounds like a chicken just got scared. Ah. So, slave narrative. What is going on with all of this? So, if you put it in quotes, it's looking for slave and narrative stuck together, searching through millions of pieces of whatever's in the library. The little star is called truncation, and it will catch things like narrative or narratives. And I put this or because I wanted oral history. And you know what? We could do slavery oral history, might be better. And slavery narrative might be better. So what it's doing is it's going to go through all of these things and look for either one in book, article, chapter titles, or scholarly article abstracts, and so on and so forth. So what do we get? There's Pacific Islands. Oh, you know what? I got better search results. There's African American journeying. I'm going to go back to slave. So maybe it's not a slavery narrative. It's an interview with a slave. Got much better results with that. See, if you look at articles, it goes from 266 up to like 3,000. There's articles over here. Oh, 6,000. So maybe slave narrative is better. But you can go into, you could see books. So here's a great one. Look at this. And it's online. It was just published. American slave narratives and oral histories. That one's going to have a lot of great stuff that you can comb through. Slave narratives. Yeah, so slavery narratives was not as good as slave narratives. And some of the bigger characters are going to show up. Frederick Douglass. How do you go through these reliably? I would say go through the big ones like books and look for keywords that they use. So is it a particular plant? Is it a particular practice, a particular tillage, a particular agricultural, what am I thinking of? The word biome shows up in my head. Is it a particular growing area? It's like North Carolina's tobacco, and farther south you go is cotton. If you want to get in, once you gather some of those keywords, then you can go in and be more specific in your searches. And then you can go into databases, and I would recommend more than any other one, the database called JSTOR. That showed up in some of our Google searches. JSTOR is kind of like the greatest hits of the last 200 years. There's a lot of stuff in J these days. And you can do a similar search with extra keywords. So let me show you what that means. So let's do slave narrative and ecology and, oh, you know what? What if we wanted to do other words and we just wanted to do it in one search? We could do ecology or botany or farming. And it would look for any one of those. And there's like something showing up, like telling me how many results I got. And it's blocking. Oh, 473. Narrative or oral history. I think interview would be okay, but that seems less formal. Narrative seems like let's get it out in book form. But JSTOR, you can get into specific keywords. It said 400 results in the outset, and now that we're in there, like, oh, actually, it's less. The problem with this one is it sometimes looks for the keywords in the full text. So cruise through the titles every search that you do and see if they talk about things that you're interested in. I'm loath to put in plantation because there's going to be so much of the social stuff in there, and so much has been written about plantations that I'm looking more about how the land is treated and things like that. You know, we could do soil. That's a big one. I have farming relatives, and soil ecology is a big deal because if the soil in your land blows away, you don't have a farm anymore. You got a bunch of rocks. Oh, no results found. That one might be a good one out on the open web. Another word that I recently learned in the last year is tillage. Tillage is the style of farming that you do. And some is really aggressive and digs in. But if you live in an area that it's very dry, that invasive digging might release too much water, and then you end up with dust. So you can try all those different words as you go. And it may be that there's not narratives, but you just have to look through the ones that exist and do full text searching when you get into them. And when you're in an ebook format, you should be able to do search this whole book for soil or cotton or blah, 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 blah. Okay? Oh, you gave me the word soil ecology. Looking at my notes. Well, okay. This is video number 1.